Hello, this video is about creating applications. I'm going to give you an example. I want to give you an example of how you could use modules Python modules to create an application. So that's the goal here. The first thing I'm going to do is just kind of talk about the process. Let's say I have 2 or 3 people I'm working with. We might sit down and then communicate how or what we're trying to do. So we identify what we're trying to accomplish and we come up with a plan. So I might go to the whiteboard and just start drawing like a system and say that we have an application, I call it my app, and the user interacts with it. And the application allows us to make a list of employees, save a list, the list data to a file, and maybe add employee data. That's what a user can do. Now they can't do that independently. They can't actually work with the list independently. They can't save the data to a file from the list independently or add employee data independently. They have to go through my application. So the user works with my app and then the app does all the other things. So that's my game plan. And then I might make a composition diagram and kind of identify the pieces of it. So I say that for my data, I want the employee ID, the first name, the last name, the file name. That's the data I want to do. For the processing stuff, I might want to get input from the user or save data to a file. I could go through on the whiteboard and list a whole bunch of things that we want to accomplish as a team. And then in the composition diagram, I could just say, okay, let's say our application, you're going to have a application. So each user is working with one application. So there's going to be one of those and only one of those. Next, it's going to have a list object that you can work with. This is a employee list. It's based off Python's list class. And it's going to have one per application. So there's only ever going to be one list in my application. And the application could run without it, but it probably wouldn't be all that useful. So, but it's still not required to be of use. I could do other things with it, I guess. I'm going to go through and say that let's make that a weak association, a aggregation. Composition is a stronger association. An employee list doesn't do much good without an employee object. And I want to be able to work with that. I also want to have my application be able to work with a employee object independently by examining it inside the list or just printing out the data from it, etc. So I'll just say that there's a weak relationship with the employee object, but a strong relationship between an individual employee object and an employee list. And you can have one or more employee objects in the list. And then I also have some kind of data processor. It will be one and only one for my application. It's not strictly necessary. I guess I could go ahead and add employees and list them and collect them. But it is probably something I want to have so that I can actually process and save the data. Otherwise, it just goes away when you close down the application. So I'll go ahead and mark that up as a loose binding and aggregation. And I'm going to say that you don't have to make multiple data processor objects. You just have one data processor and only one. And so I'll go ahead and, probably should have made that composition. But it doesn't matter too much. So now, once I've kind of got that on the board and we've talked about it, we say, composition would be better than aggregation or whatever. Let's make that strongly bound. I just go ahead and fill in some color on there. And I don't like what I did here, so I'll just go ahead and fill in the color. Yeah, okay, I don't like what I did there either, but I think you get the idea. And I'll just say that this is, composition instead. But once I've just talked about it and we bounce it around, the idea around between the team members, now we go through and start implementing. And we decide who's going to make the various different classes. We assign the workload, who's going to make the test harnesses, who's going to go ahead and make the processing script or the script for the different data types, such as employee or person or whatever it's going to be. And we just divvy up the work and go forth and do it. So in our case, we've already got some code files that we have made from an earlier time, in this case, earlier as in a couple of videos ago. And so we can just reuse it for our new application. And that's one of the beauties of using these little module files. For each application, there may be many times I could reuse the data processor module in a different application. Now that application may not be working with employees, maybe it's working with customers, but data processing still may apply. So a different app and some of the modules can be reused in this other app, this fictitious app that I might make in the future. So once I had that in mind, I go through and make those classes or reuse them if they're already made. And of course, I'll need a main script to act as the main part of my application. This is the starting point. So I'd go through and create a script, and I want to make sure that it runs as a main module. If not, this is not a file that's supposed to be imported. It's actually interactive. I'll go through and I'll declare my objects, such as I want to make a variable for my objects, nothing yet. An ID number, maybe the last ID number to find out what the employee IDs are going to be used on the client, maybe the first name and last name, the input, all those things. And I would start by going through and defining a function for processing. So these are my little variables, my data section, a process area for my methods. We've talked about dividing up your work into data and processing and input-output. So here in my processing section, I'll go ahead and make a function that allows people to create employee objects. A function that's purpose in life is to go through and create objects is referred to as a factory. And so this would be a factory function, or sometimes you hear them called factory methods, same thing. So its purpose in life is to go through and make up objects. You pass over some data, I'll go through and make you an object. The idea is this is a design pattern, and as you start getting into software engineering, there's a bunch of design patterns, but the factory pattern is really, really common. So I've made a method whose whole purpose in life is to create employee objects, and I'll go ahead and collect the data and create an object from it. When I do, I'll also add it to the employee list from my employees module. And of course, I got my try-catch block there for any exception handling. I've also got another function called save data to file, and you notice that this one's working with my other modules. I'm not working with the modules directly, I'm working with them through my functions, not a bad pattern. In this case, it just goes through and allows me to create a file name called employee-data.txt. And let's see, do I ever call the method? Let's see, toString. Oh, looks like, oh, here it is, save data. It looks like I got reached here for some testing purposes. I don't know what I was thinking. But anyway, you call save data, it should save the data. If not, the try-catch block will, or try-except block should give us an error message. Now, as far as the presentation piece, this is where the user interacts with it. I'll get some user input. So while it's true, it should always be true until I exit out, I'll ask, would you like to add employee data? Yes or no? And if they say yes, I'll ask for the ID. I'll tell them what the last ID was, and this way they can decide whether to use another ID, the next one in the line, or just make up one on their own at their discretion. If I'm working with databases and other things, the database software may make the IDs for me, but that's neither here nor there. Right now I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and that's what that last ID was for. It started off at 0, so the last ID would show up as 0, and then it'd be bumped by 1 next time it goes through. And then I'll get the first name and the last name, call that process new employee, and that's pretty much it. At that point, if they don't type in yes when they ask them the question, would you like to add an employee, it will immediately jump down to the else of the, part of the if statement, which will break out of that loop. Now, this is complex code, but we've been working on it for a while, and I bet you, even in this black and white format, you can actually see it and read it. That's pretty cool. We've come a long way since the beginning of class. And I'll go ahead and call the employee list and print out the information. And also go ahead and ask if they would like to save the data. If they do, I'll go ahead and save it. I made it a DAT file, but I'm only writing text. I'm not pickling it or anything. I'll call that method, and then that's it. I'll end the application. So now that I have this main module, this main script file, and I add that to my other module files, I will have created an application. I will have gone through and created an application. And that's what we're going to practice next in the next lab, which we'll see you in the next video and talk about that.